Elara had 3 seconds to decide. She could remain a ghost in the shadows of the velvet curtains, watching the most dangerous man in the city walk into his own grave, or she could step into the light and destroy herself to save him. Her hand was already shaking as she lunged forward, her tattered hoodie feeling like a target on her back. Security reached for their guns. His fiancée's perfect smile froze. And Elara did the one thing a girl from the streets should never do. She threw her arms around the Untouchable King in a desperate hug. The room erupted. Gasps cut through the air like gunfire as conversations died mid-sentence. Crystal glasses slipped from stunned fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Men who had killed without hesitation shifted instinctively, hands hovering near concealed weapons. Jang Kai-Wung-min did not move. He stood perfectly still, the dragon tattoo peeking above his collar as Elara pressed her lips to his ear and whispered the 5 words that stopped time. "The wine! It is poisoned." In that second, the most dangerous man in the room became the center of a storm he never saw coming. The heavy oak doors of the private study swung shut, sealing out the panicked roar of the ballroom, and replacing it with a silence so thick it felt like a physical weight. Jang Kai-Wung-min leaned against the edge of a massive mahogany desk, his movements fluid and predatory despite the chaos he had just escaped. He didn't look like a man who had almost been poisoned. He looked like a god deciding whether or not to strike. His eyes, dark and unreadable, never left Elara as she stood shivering in the center of the room. "Speak," he commanded. The word was low, vibrating with a quiet power that made Elara's knees want to buckle. "You have 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't let my men remove you from this building, permanently." Elara's hands shook as she reached into the pocket of her oversized, dirt-streaked hoodie. Outside, she was a ghost of the streets, someone men like Kai-Wung-min stepped over without a second glance. But inside this room, she held the thread to his life. She pulled out a cracked burner phone, its screen glowing dimly against her pale skin. "I didn't do it for the drama," she whispered, her voice raspy from cold nights and fear. "I did it because I was under the balcony. I was looking for a warm place to sleep when I heard them." She pressed play. The audio was grainy, distorted by the wind, but the voices were unmistakable. The elegant, melodic tone of his fiancée, the woman currently crying fake tears in the ballroom, cut through the static. "Once he drinks the toast, it will look like a heart attack. By the time the paramedics arrive, the assets will already be transferring. He's a king, yes, but even kings need to be buried." Kai-Wung-min's expression didn't change, but Elara saw his jaw tighten, the dragon tattoo on his neck appearing to coil as his muscles flexed. He stepped toward her, the scent of expensive tobacco and dangerous intent closing the gap between them. He took the phone from her trembling fingers, his cold skin brushing hers. "You're a nobody, Elara," he said, reading the name on a worn ID card that slipped from her pocket. "Why risk your life for a man like me? You know what I am." Elara looked up, meeting the gaze of the city's most feared predator. "I know you're a monster," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, jagged edge of courage. "But you're a monster who keeps the other wolves away from this neighborhood. If you die, people like me become prey for men much worse than you." Kai-Wung-min studied her, really looked at her, noticing the hollows of her cheeks and the fierce, flickering fire in her eyes. He realized then that she wasn't just a girl from the streets. She was a survivor who had recognized a fellow soul in the dark. He set the phone on the desk and looked toward the door where his security waited. "The betrayal is proven," he murmured, more to himself than her. Then his gaze snapped back to her. "But you're a problem I didn't plan for, and I think you're running from a wolf of your own." Kai-Wung-min didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that he controlled with a flick of his wrist. The silence in the room stretched, taut and vibrating, until he finally turned back. His eyes were no longer just assessing her as a witness, they were dissecting her as a survivor. He had spent his life reading people, and the way Elara flinched when he moved too quickly, the way her eyes darted toward the door every time a floorboard creaked, told him more than the audio recording ever could. "The woman I was supposed to marry is currently being escorted to a basement she will never leave," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She made the mistake of thinking I was a victim. But you, Elara, You're different. You're not a predator, and you're definitely not a guest. So why is a girl who lives in the shadows so terrified of being found?" Elara pulled her tattered hoodie tighter around her chest, trying to hide the way her heart was racing. "I told you. I was just hiding from the rain." "You were hiding from a man," Kai Wung-min countered, stepping closer until he was standing directly in her personal space. He reached out, his gloved fingers catching the edge of her hood and pulling it back just enough to reveal the faint, yellowing bruise along her jawline. "I know that look. It's the look of someone who is being tracked. Someone who knows that no matter how far they run, the monster is always 10 steps behind." Elara's breath hitched. For a second, the image of Devon, his cold, controlling eyes and the way he monitored her every move, flashed before her. "His name is Devon," she whispered, the secret finally breaking free. "He doesn't just want me back, he wants to own me. He has people everywhere. I can't go to the police and I can't stay on the streets anymore. He's closing in." Kai Wung-min watched her, a dark spark of recognition in his eyes. He lived in a world of ownership and control. He knew exactly how men like Devon operated. He also knew that Elara had just handed him his life on a silver platter, and in his world, debts were settled in blood or loyalty. "You saved my life tonight, Elara. That makes you a target for my enemies, but it also makes you mine to protect," he said, his voice dropping to a low, hypnotic rumble. "I can make Devon disappear. I can give you a name, a home, and a wall of steel that no one can climb, but it won't be free." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. "You will be my wife, a contract marriage to show the world that I am not weak, and to give me the excuse to keep you by my side while I clean my house of traitors. You give me your silence and your loyalty, and I will give you the one thing you've never had, sanctuary." Elara looked at the hand he held out, a hand that belonged to a man who killed without hesitation, yet offered the only safety she had ever known. She took a breath, stepped out of the shadows, and placed her trembling palm in his. "I accept." The transformation did not happen in a salon, but in the sterile, high-security wing of Kai Wung-min's sprawling estate. For 3 hours, Elara was scrubbed, polished, and draped in fabrics that felt like liquid moonlight. The tattered hoodie that had been her armor for 3 years was gone, incinerated on Kai Wung-min's orders. In its place was a silk gown the color of a bruised midnight sky, its neckline sharp and elegant, hiding the jagged memories she carried beneath her skin. When the stylists finally stepped back, Elara didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Her messy hair had been tamed into sleek waves, and her face, once smudged with the soot of the city, now glowed with a porcelain finish. She looked like a queen, but she felt like a fraud. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a silver cage. The doors opened, and Kai Wung-min stepped in. He had traded his gala attire for a sharp, charcoal-gray suit that made him look even more like a shadow come to life. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over her with a slow, deliberate intensity that made Elara's breath hitch. There was no warmth in his eyes, but there was something else, a possessive, dark curiosity. "The girl from the streets is gone," he murmured, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, stopping just shy of the bruise he knew was hidden under the makeup. "Now, the city needs to see the woman who stole my heart in 3 seconds. If they think I'm obsessed with you, they won't question why I'm burning my world down to keep you safe." He held out a heavy velvet box. Inside lay a necklace of black diamonds, cold and brilliant. As he stepped behind her to fasten the clasp, his chest brushed against her back, and Elara felt the radiating heat of him. "Tonight you are the crown jewel of this empire," he whispered against her ear, his breath ghosting over her skin. "Stay close, don't speak unless I tell you, and Elara, try not to look like you're waiting for the floor to swallow you. You're a queen now, act like you've owned this room your entire life." They entered the secondary ballroom where his inner circle had gathered, a den of lions waiting for news of the failed engagement. The moment Kai Wung-min appeared with Elara on his arm, the air vanished from the room. The silence was even heavier than it had been at the gala. Men who had spent decades trying to read the Untouchable King stared in shock at the woman he was holding with such fierce, public intimacy. Kaiwoo Min raised a glass, his eyes scanning the crowd for the flickers of betrayal that still remained. "The engagement is off," he announced, his voice carrying a lethal edge. "I've found someone far more interesting. Meet Elara. She is the only thing in this city that belongs to me now." The chandelier-drenched ballroom of the Continental Hotel felt less like a party and more like a battlefield. This was the Lion's Den, a gathering of the city's most ruthless investors and underworld lieutenants. As Kaiwoo Min led Elara through the gilded doors, the air didn't just chill, it solidified. Every eye tracked the girl from the streets, searching for the crack in her expensive armor. Elara felt the weight of the black diamonds at her throat, a heavy reminder of the contract that bound her to the man whose hand was currently resting with possessive firmness on the small of her back. Standing by the fountain, draped in blood-red lace, was the fiancé. Though her status was in tatters, her pride remained a jagged weapon. She didn't hide, she waited. As Kaiwoo Min and Elara approached, she stepped forward, a glass of champagne held between manicured fingers that looked like talons. "Jang," she purred, her voice a poisonous honey that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "I see you've developed a charitable streak. It's a lovely dress, really. It almost masks the scent of the gutter." The circle of onlookers tightened. Elara felt the familiar urge to shrink, to become the invisible ghost Devon had trained her to be. But the pressure of Kaiwoo Min's hand increased, a silent command to stand her ground. "The gutter is where one finds the truth," Kaiwoo Min replied, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "A concept you've always struggled with, Isabella." The fiancé let out a sharp, mocking laugh, turning her attention to Elara. "Tell me, darling, does it bother you, knowing that you're just a temporary shield? A street dog he's dressed up to spite me. I wonder if he told you about the others, the ones who thought they were special before they were discarded." She leaned in, her perfume cloying and suffocating. "You don't belong here. You're a footnote in a story you can't read." Isabella reached out, as if to fix a stray hair on Elara's shoulder, but her hand moved toward the delicate clasp of Elara's necklace. A calculated move to accidentally break the jewelry and humiliate her in front of the elite. Before the fingers could touch silk, Elara caught Isabella's wrist. The movement was fast, born of years spent defending herself in dark alleys. The room went dead silent. Elara didn't flinch. She looked Isabella in the eye, her voice quiet but carrying the steel of a survivor. "You're right. I don't know the rules of this world," Elara said, her grip tightening just enough to make the other woman's smile falter. "But I know how to spot a predator. And in the world I come from, the loudest ones are usually the most desperate. You didn't lose Jang because of me. You lost him because you were too arrogant to realize he was never yours to kill." Kaiwoo Min's lips curved into the ghost of a dark, satisfied smile. He stepped forward, reclaiming Elara's side. "I believe we're done here," he said to the room at large. As they walked away, leaving the fiancé fuming in the center of a whispering crowd, Elara realized for the first time that the crown didn't just feel like a weight, it felt like a weapon. The victory at the hotel felt short-lived the moment they returned to the sanctuary of the estate. The cold adrenaline of the confrontation with Isabella was still humming in Elara's veins, but it vanished instantly when she saw the silver tray waiting on the marble console in the foyer. On it sat a small, battered envelope, shockingly out of place against the pristine luxury of the mansion. There was no stamp, no return address, only her name written in a handwriting that made her stomach turn into a knot of ice. Kaiwoo Min sensed the change in her before she even reached for it. He watched as the color drained from her face, leaving her porcelain skin looking translucent and fragile once more. Without a word. He took the envelope, his gloved fingers ripping it open with a clinical efficiency. Inside was a single Polaroid photo and a handwritten note. The photo was a candid shot of Elara from only an hour ago, taken through a long-range lens as she stepped out of the car at the Continental Hotel. She was smiling at something Kaiwoo Min had said, a rare, genuine moment of light caught on film. But across her throat, a thick red line had been drawn with a marker. The note was shorter and far more devastating. "I see you, little bird. Silk doesn't hide the scent of fear. I'm coming to take back what's mine." "It's him," Elara whispered, her voice cracking as she leaned against the wall for support. The invisible savior was gone, replaced by the hunted girl who knew that no walls were high enough to keep Devon out. He was there. He was watching us. He knows I'm with you, Jang. He's going to kill us both. Kai Wung-min stared at the red line on the photo, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure, dark malice. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who had finally found something worth destroying. He crumpled the note in his fist, the paper screaming as it was crushed. He made a mistake, Kai Wung-min said, his voice a low, terrifying growl that vibrated through the hallway. He stepped toward Elara, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering with a new, protective intensity. He thinks you are still his property. He thinks this is a game of hide and seek. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, forcing her to look into the abyss of his gaze. He didn't just find you, Elara. He found me. And in this city, no one survives a direct threat to what belongs to the king. My security will double by morning. My hounds are already on the scent. If he wants to come for you, let him. I've been waiting for a reason to show him what happens to wolves who wander into my garden. But as Elara looked at the crumpled photo, she knew Devon wasn't just a wolf. He was a ghost, and ghosts didn't care about kings. The tension in the mansion had shifted from a cold, professional strategy to a heavy, suffocating weight. After the threat from Devon arrived, Kai Wung-min had moved Elara to the most secure suite in the West Wing, a room that felt more like a vault than a bedroom. He found her standing by the balcony doors, her silk gown discarded for a simple robe, staring out at the rain-streaked glass. She looked small, the black diamonds still glittering around her neck like a reminder of the debt she owed him. "You haven't slept," Kai Wung-min said, his voice cutting through the silence. He didn't ask, he was observant to a fault. Elara didn't turn around. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the click of his camera. I hear his voice telling me I'm still his property. Kai Wung-min walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He reached out to take her shoulder, but as he did, the silk of her robe slipped, revealing the skin above her shoulder blade. He froze. In the dim light, the jagged, silvery lines of old scars stood out in stark relief against her pale skin. They weren't the clean marks of a surgeon or the accidental scrapes of the street. They were the intentional, cruel signatures of a man who used pain as a language of control. "He did this," Kai Wung-min murmured, his voice dropping to a register that was dangerously low. Elara instinctively pulled the robe up, her face burning with a mixture of shame and old terror. "It's why I ran. It's why I learned to be invisible. If he can see me, he can hurt me." For the first time since she had met him, the Untouchable King didn't look like a predator. He looked like a man who was seeing his own reflection in the wreckage of someone else's life. He slowly reached out again, and this time, Elara didn't flinch. He traced the edge of a scar with the tip of his finger, his touch so light it was almost a ghost of a sensation. "I have my own," he whispered. He unbuttoned the top of his shirt, pulling the collar back to reveal a thick, rope-like burn mark that disappeared beneath his dragon tattoo. "My father gave me this to teach me that loyalty is forged in fire. I spent 30 years building this empire so no one could ever touch me again. I thought power was the only way to be safe." He looked into her eyes, and the mask of the Mafia boss finally slipped. Beneath the stoic authority was a raw, jagged vulnerability that mirrored her own. "I gave you a contract to protect my reputation, Elara, but seeing what he did to you, it's not about the contract anymore. I don't want to own you. I want to be the reason you never have to hide again." Elara reached up, her fingers trembling as she touched the edge of his tattoo, bridging the gap between the street girl and the king. In that moment, the fake marriage died, replaced by a terrifyingly real connection. They weren't a boss and a witness anymore. They were two broken souls finally standing in the light. The fragile piece of the West Wing was shattered not by a gunshot, but by the frantic ringing of a burner phone that shouldn't have been active. Elara snatched the device from the nightstand, her knuckles turning ghost white. When she pressed it to her ear, the voice on the other end wasn't the one she expected. It was her younger sister, Maya, her breaths coming in jagged, terrified sobs that sliced through the quiet room like a blade. "Elara, please," he said. If I called you, he wouldn't. The phone was ripped away, and then came the sound Elara had heard in her nightmares for 3 years. Devon's laugh was low, smooth, and utterly devoid of mercy. It was the sound of a man who enjoyed the hunt more than the kill. "You really thought a penthouse and a monster in a suit could hide you, little bird?" Devon's voice purred through the speaker, vibrating with a sick sense of triumph. "You left a trail of breadcrumbs right back to the only person who still remembers your real name. Maya is sitting in a very cold chair in a very dark place, and she's wondering why her big sister traded her life for a silk dress." Elara's world tilted. The invisible savior collapsed under the weight of a bone-deep guilt. She had tried to save a king, and in doing so, she had served her own flesh and blood to a wolf. "Please," she choked out, her knees hitting the plush carpet. "Take me, just let her go. She has nothing to do with this." "Oh, I'm taking you both," Devon replied, his tone sharpening into a command. "But first, I want to see the king bleed. Tell your husband that if he wants to keep his new prize, he needs to come to the old shipyard at Pier 14. Alone. If I see a single black car or a flicker of his security detail, the girl dies before he hits the gate. You have 20 minutes. The line went dead. Elara looked up to find Kai Wung-min standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the harsh hallway light. He had heard everything. The vulnerability they had shared moments ago was gone, replaced by a cold, tectonic fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. He didn't look like a man considering his options. He looked like an executioner reaching for his axe. "He thinks I'm a man who follows rules," Kai Wung-min said, his voice a terrifyingly calm whisper. He walked over to the safe, pulling out a sleek, suppressed handgun and checking the chamber with a practiced, metallic click. "He thinks he can use my fortress against me by pulling me out of it." "You can't go alone," Elara cried, grabbing his sleeve. "It's a trap, Jang. He'll kill you the moment he sees you." Kai Wung-min looked down at her, his eyes as dark and eternal as the abyss. He leaned down, his hand cupping her face with a sudden, fierce intensity. "He made the mistake of bringing your family into my war. He wanted to lure the boss out of his fortress." He leaned closer, his forehead pressing against hers. "He's about to find out that I am the fortress, and I'm coming to burn his world to the ground." The shipyard at Pier 14 was a skeletal graveyard of rusted cranes and rotting timber, swallowed by a fog so thick it felt like a shroud. Inside the main warehouse, the air was stagnant, smelling of salt and old oil. Devon sat in a metal chair, casually tossing a switchblade into the floorboards near where Maya lay bound and gagged. He looked up, a jagged, predatory grin spreading across his face as the heavy warehouse door groaned open. Jang Kai Wung-min stepped into the dim light. He was alone, his hands visible and empty, his black overcoat catching the shadows like a silhouette of death itself. He didn't look like a man walking into a trap. He looked like the storm that had finally made landfall. "The Untouchable King," Devon mocked, standing up and pulling Maya roughly to her feet, holding the blade to her throat. "You actually came. I didn't think a man who buys his women would care enough to see how they're made. She's been crying for her sister, Jang. Do you think Elara will still love you when she's mourning a ghost?" Kai Wung-min didn't stop walking until he was 20 feet away. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the drip of rainwater from the rafters. "You've spent your life hunting things smaller than you, Devon," Kai Wung-min said, his voice a low, terrifyingly steady hum. "You think you know what fear is because you see it in her eyes, but you've never seen it in mine." "Don't move," Devon screamed, his composure snapping at the boss's utter lack of hesitation. "I'll kill her. I'll do it right now." "You won't," Kai Wung-min replied. In a movement so fast it defied the eye, he reached behind his back. He didn't pull a gun. He threw a heavy, weighted object that slammed into the overhead light fixture. The warehouse plunged into absolute darkness. The sound of Devon's panicked breathing was the only roadmap. Then came the metallic snick of a suppressed barrel. A single flash of light strobed in the dark, followed by a grunt of pain. When the backup emergency lights flickered on with a dying hum, the scene had shifted. Devon was on the floor, clutching a shattered shoulder, his blade skittering across the concrete. Kai Wung-min stood over him, his boot pressing down on the man's throat with enough pressure to stifle a scream but leave room for a prayer. Maya had been shoved aside, trembling but untouched. "You wanted to see the king bleed," Kaiwung-min whispered, leaning down so his dragon tattoo was the last thing Devon would ever see. "But you forgot that a king's first duty is to execute the vermin in his palace." There was no grand speech. There was only the muffled sound of a final debt being settled. Kaiwung-min turned his back on the remains of Elara's past and walked toward the terrified girl on the floor. He knelt, his hands, the hands that had just ended a life, untying her ropes with a gentleness that was almost heartbreaking. "It's over, Maya," he said softly. "Let's take you home to your sister." The transition was not marked by a sudden explosion, but by the quiet, systematic dismantling of a fortress. In the weeks following the shipyard confrontation, the name Jang Kaiwung-min began to fade from the city's ledger of fear. He didn't just walk away. He severed the ties, liquidating the assets that had been built on blood and transferring the rest into legitimate trusts that would ensure the untouchable king was truly dead. To the world, the dragon had retreated into the mist, but for the man himself, the air had finally become clear enough to breathe. Elara stood on the balcony of their new home, a quiet, glass-walled villa perched far from the noise of the district where she had once fought for scraps of bread. She wore a simple white linen dress, the heavy black diamonds of the contract era locked away in a safe she no longer remembered the combination to. Behind her, the door slid open, and Kaiwung-min stepped out. He was dressed in a soft sweater, his movements lacking the jagged, lethal edge that had once defined him. "The last of the papers were signed this morning," he said, his voice a warm hum against the evening breeze. "The empire is gone, Elara. There are no more bosses, no more lieutenants, and no more blood debts." Elara turned to him, the setting sun catching the light in her eyes. "You gave up everything. You were the king of this city, Jang. Do you ever regret losing it?" Kaiwung-min walked to her, his hands, now free of the shadow of violence, cupping her face with a tenderness that still made her heart skip. He looked at her, really seeing the woman who had once been invisible, the girl who had saved him when she had nothing of her own to lose. "I didn't lose anything," he whispered, his forehead leaning against hers in the way that had become their silent language of truth. "I traded a throne of glass for a foundation of stone. I spent my life building walls to keep people out, only to realize I was just building my own prison. You were the only one brave enough to climb over them." He reached into his pocket, but there was no velvet box and no contract. He pulled out 2 simple gold bands, polished and modest. "No more deals, Elara. No more hiding behind a story we told to keep the wolves away. Just a choice. My choice is you, every day for the rest of our lives." Elara smiled, her hand closing over his. The invisible savior and the untouchable king were ghosts of a past that no longer had a hold on them. As she slid the ring onto his finger, she realized that the greatest betrayal wasn't the one she had stopped at the gala. It was the one they had almost committed against themselves by believing they didn't deserve a life built on love. "And my choice is you," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Beneath the soft glow of the rising moon, they didn't look like survivors. They looked like a beginning, in a city that thrived on secrets. They had found the most dangerous power of all, the courage to be honest,